This is New Zealand, just south of the Pacific Ocean, about 4,000 kilometers away from Australia, the second most peaceful country in the world. Most of the people living in India and Pakistan, like me, know New Zealand only because of cricket. Brendan McCullum, Ross Taylor, Daniel Vittori. I knew New Zealand because of these, but New Zealand is very famous in the world, especially because of its large mountain ranges, beautiful articles, and high-quality organic food. Some of you may already know that the famous movie Lord of the Rings was also shot in these beautiful plains of New Zealand. New Zealand's weather is exactly like the UK's, light summer, long winter, and a lot of rain. But in spite of this, the population of New Zealand is not even 7% of the population of the UK. If you see this map of New Zealand, you will see that almost 80% of the country is completely empty and no one lives there. 70% of New Zealand's population lives here in the north, and 50% of the north's population also lives in this one city, Auckland. Why is 80% of New Zealand empty despite such great weather, beautiful scenery, low crime rates, and high standards of living? Today we will know the answer to this question. The truth is that the first thing you will notice in this video if you look at the world map is that New Zealand is very far away from the rest of the world. That means if you board a ship from Karachi or Mumbai, then after crossing the entire Arabian Sea and Indian Ocean, you can reach New Zealand only after about 18 to 22 hours of flight. And now the question arises why humans are so far away from the world. How do I reach this island? Now there are multiple views here. If we go to the official website of New Zealand, it is written there that between 1320 and 1350, Maori people discovered New Zealand. All these islands in the Maori Pacific Ocean, which are also called Polynesian Islands, the people living on them were called according to official sources. Around the 13th century, the Maori left all these islands, sat in big boats, and reached New Zealand. This roughly coincides with the time when the Mongols and Genghis Khan were taking control of the whole of Eurasia. But now the question arises, why did these people leave their old island and come to New Zealand? When we researched to find out the question, we learned from some articles that there is a slight difference in Maori's own historical records. According to Maori traditions, New Zealand was not discovered in the 13th century but more than 500 years earlier, around 750 AD, by a Maori named Kupe. Kupe was a fisherman who caught fish for himself and his tribe. But then it started happening that whenever the net was set, its fish would be eaten by the octopuses found in that area. And these people do not feel anything now because they had their main food source anyway. The fish started creating a lot of problems, and the solution was found. Kupo and some of his companions would try to find another island by going into the sea, where there is a good supply of food and drink. In this search, Coop landed in the Pacific Ocean with 20 to 25 men. After traveling for a few days, he saw an island with big mountains. This was New Zealand, an island rich in seafood, sheep, goats, and fruits, on which there was no other human being. It was the perfect place for the Coop and its drive. Kupe sent his moon companions back to Politician Island to inform the rest of the island, and in this way the Maori people began to settle in New Zealand. Till the 17th century, Maori people lived peacefully in New Zealand, and because they were away from the world, they had neither enemy nor friendship with anyone. But all this was about to change very soon. This was the time when the Western nation was spreading all over the world to increase its power. Explorers were being sent to discover the islands, countries, and continents, by capturing which the European countries could increase their power. In this connection, a Dutch explorer named Abel Tasman went out in search of a continent in the south of the Pacific Ocean. Because at that time, the Europeans thought that there would definitely be some continents in this part, and if this happened, it would open doors to many opportunities for the European countries. Tasman discovered New Zealand in 1642, but when he tried to land there, he had a bloody fight with the Maori people and was forced to flee. Then, in 1769, a British officer reached New Zealand, looking for James on this continent. Once again, there was a fierce battle between the soldiers of James and the Maori people, and many Maori chiefs were also killed in it. James had to go back, but this time he made a detailed map of New Zealand and all this travel, and through this map Europeans started reaching this island in the 18th century, and this time they dealt smartly with the Maori people. By giving them the greed of trade and profit, the British started building their naval port there, and only after 100 years did they take complete control of New Zealand. A treaty was signed in 1840 between the British and the Maori people, which is called the Treaty of Batangi, and after this treaty, New Zealand officially became part of Europe and the British Empire. At that time, the population of Maori people was about 20 million, but in the next 100 years, instead of increasing this population, it decreased from 20 million to 40,000, and it had two main reasons. In fact, when the Europeans came here, those diseases also came here, which were common in Europe at that time. The problem was that the Maori people had not developed immunity to this disease, and that's why local Maori people started getting sick and dying after European immigration. In the second half of the 19th century, New Zealand had become a very violent place. Just 5 years after the Treaty of Batangi, a series of land ownership wars between the British and local Maori began, which continued for the next 40 years. Many local Maori were killed in these wars, and finally this whole process stopped in 1881, when all the big chiefs of Maori were killed, and the Maori movement was badly crushed. Now the British also understood that without including the local in the development process, it cannot progress, and that is why, immediately after these wars, the British government made the local a stakeholder in every development project from the electorate process, and thus in New Zealand. The journey of 20 more steps has finally begun. But even today, as we showed you in the beginning of the video, why is so much of New Zealand empty? And why do all the people live here on Northern Ireland? In fact, this Ireland region of New Zealand is completely empty because it is almost impossible to live or construct in this whole area. The plains of New Zealand have mountain ranges on all sides. There are high mountains everywhere in this area, and the land is so uneven that it is almost impossible to build even basic infrastructure like roads, etc. The land on the eastern side of this side of the mountains is very fertile and infertile, due to which irrigation, etc. cannot be done here. That is why the majority of the population of New Zealand lives here on the North Island. To solve this issue of population shortage, the New Zealand government relaxed its immigration policy after World War II and prohibited the entry of non-white people in New Zealand before World War II. For this reason, the population of New Zealand remained stagnant until 1950. After that, when this restriction was over, people from Asia, especially China, the Philippines, and India, started coming here, and finally the much-needed boom started in the population of New Zealand. Today, almost 27% of New Zealand's population are immigrants, people who were born outside New Zealand. The majority of the immigrants live here in Auckland and its surrounding areas, and this is the reason why Auckland is one of the most unaffordable cities in the world today. Because the land supply is less and the demand for housing is high. To solve this problem, the New Zealand government is now offering people up to $8,000 to relocate to Waikato, 100 kilometers from Auckland, to ease the pressure on Auckland's housing market and normalize prices. One very interesting thing is that the entire agricultural industry of New Zealand runs on exporting animal meat. Here in the Northern Islands there is such lush green land because of the rains. Countless sheep, goats, and cows are found. The population of New Zealand is close to 5 million, while according to an estimate the population of sheep and goats here is almost 30 million, which is why New Zealand is the largest exporter of mutton and sheep wool in the world. 95% of New Zealand's meat is exported outside, and in 2019, New Zealand earned a revenue of $46 billion from this export. New Zealand is the 50th largest economy in the world, and the economy's main source of revenue is agricultural exports. Earning $46 billion only from the export of meat is an unbelievable thing, and it should be a motivation for India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, as these three are primarily agricultural countries. Please subscribe my channel and share this video with your friends and family. Thank you.